The dog saw her first. That was the thing that mattered in the end. Not the Spanish, and not the guests, and not the dinner table, and not the moment when the whole room went quiet, and the whole room understood. All of it began with the dog, who saw her first, and decided she was worth seeing, and everything else followed from the dog's decision, the way things followed from the decisions of creatures who did not calculate, and did not perform, and simply knew. The dog's name was Cato. He was a large gray Irish wolfhound, 7 years old, with the particular dignity of large old dogs who had decided that dignity was the correct approach to the world and had maintained it through every circumstance the world had offered. He was the Duke's dog in the way that meant he had been with the Duke since he was 8 weeks old and had never been anyone else's, and he went where the Duke went and sat where the Duke sat and was present in every room the Duke entered, quiet and enormous and entirely himself. He had never taken to a stranger quickly. That was known about him. The household knew it, and the Duke's guests knew it, and the county knew it, in the general way of knowing things about a man's particular dog, which was that Cato was not unfriendly, but he was not easily won, and the winning of him, when it happened, was noted. He saw her on a Tuesday morning in April, and he decided immediately. She was in the kitchen garden. She had been sent to the kitchen garden by the housekeeper, Mrs. Aldworth, whose manner was the manner of a woman who had run the Renmore estate household for 22 years, and had strong views about where temporary staff belonged and where they did not, and temporary staff who had been hired for the 3-week period of the Duke's house party belonged in the kitchen and the kitchen garden and the service corridors, and not in the parts of the house where guests moved and breathed and formed opinions. Her name was Catalina Voss. She was 24, and she had been born in Seville to an English father and a Spanish mother, and had grown up between the two countries in the way of children who belong fully to two worlds and are therefore slightly foreign in each, which was not a comfortable condition, but was a useful one, because a person who was always slightly foreign learned to read rooms very quickly. She had been reading rooms quickly for 24 years. She had come to England 3 years ago when her father died, and there was nothing left in Seville to stay for, and she had found work as a cook's assistant, and then as a cook, and then, through the particular network of household staffing that ran through the county's better houses like a quiet river, as a temporary cook for house parties, which was her current capacity at Renmore. She was a very good cook. She was a very good cook in the specific way that came from 2 cuisines rather than 1, from the Spanish understanding of olive oil and saffron and slow heat, and the English understanding of pastry and stock, and the patience of a long braise. And the combination was the combination of a person who had grown up eating both, and understood both from the inside. Mrs. Aldworth had hired her for the 3 weeks of the house party because the regular cook had broken her wrist in March and would not be available until May, and temporary cooks of the right quality were not easy to find, and Catalina had been recommended by 3 separate households as the best temporary cook available in the county. Mrs. Aldworth had hired her with the efficiency of a woman who made decisions quickly, and the particular reservation of a woman who did not entirely trust the recommendation of other households because other households did not have the standards of Renmore. She had been at Renmore for 4 days when the dog found her. She was in the kitchen garden because the kitchen garden was where she needed to be, because the saffron rice she was planning for Thursday needed fresh herbs, and the kitchen garden had them, and she was the kind of cook who went to the source, rather than sending someone else and receiving whatever came back. She was crouching at the herb bed when the dog appeared. He came around the corner of the garden wall with the unhurried quality of a large animal that had nowhere urgent to be, and he came to the bed where she was crouching, and he put his enormous nose into the thyme she was examining, and smelled it with the particular thoroughness of a dog who took smelling seriously, and then he sat down beside her, with the quality of a dog who had made a decision and was staying. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, in Spanish, because she thought in Spanish when she was not being watched and she had not expected a dog. Hello, large one. Cato's ears moved. She said, "You are very large and very gray, and you have decided I am interesting." He shifted forward 2 inches, which on a dog his size was a significant movement. She said, "I am making saffron rice on Thursday." She said, "The time is for the stock." She said, "Good stock is the foundation of good rice, and good rice is the foundation of a good dinner, and a good dinner is the whole point of the next 3 weeks." She said, "Are you hungry?" He was not demonstrably hungry, but he was very interested in the time, and she cut a small sprig and held it out, and he smelled it with great seriousness, and then looked at her with the expression of a dog who had confirmed something he had already suspected. She said, "Yes, I know." She said, "The time is good this year." She said, "Good soil." She went back to the cutting, and he stayed beside her for the whole of it, and when she stood up with the basket, he stood too and walked with her to the kitchen door, and at the kitchen door she said, in Spanish, "Good morning, large one," and went in, and he sat on the kitchen step for 10 minutes before he went back to wherever he had come from. Mrs. Aldworth saw this from the passage window and filed it without comment. The Duke saw it differently. He had been at his desk in the study that looked over the kitchen garden, working on the correspondence that accumulated during house parties in the way of water behind a dam, and he had looked up at the movement in the garden, and he had seen Cato sitting beside a woman he did not recognize, which was unusual enough that he watched. He watched her talk to the dog. He could not hear what she was saying, and he could see from the distance that whatever she was saying was not the performance of talking to a dog, which was a thing people did when they were aware of being watched, but the actual thing, which was a woman having a conversation with an animal she had just met, as though the conversation were reasonable. He had not seen Cato sit beside a stranger in 7 years. He watched until she went into the kitchen, and the dog sat on the step for a while, and then came back, and the Duke went back to the correspondence, and he thought about it in the part of his mind that thought about things quietly, without announcing them. His name was Raphael Vane, and he was 40, and he had been the Duke of Renmore for 12 years, and he had been managing the estate and the title and the house parties and the county expectations for those 12 years, with the efficiency of a man who had been trained from birth to manage them, which was an efficiency that was thorough and capable and not particularly joyful. He was not unhappy. He was, if he was precise about it, functioning. He had been functioning for 12 years, with the occasional interruption of something that was not functioning, which was what he called the moments when something surprised him, and those moments were less frequent than they had been when he was younger, and more thorough than he had expected the world to be. Cato sitting beside the woman in the kitchen garden was a small surprise. He noted it and went back to the correspondence. The house party began on Wednesday. The guests arrived in the Wednesday afternoon with the energy of people who had been looking forward to the Renmore house party, which had a reputation for excellent company and excellent food, and the particular quality of the Duke's management, which was that things worked at Renmore, and things working was more unusual in house parties than it should have been. There were 12 guests. Among them was a woman named Lady Forsyth, who was 35 and a widow of 2 years, and who had been brought to the Renmore house party by her friend Lady Cressmore, with the particular intention that Lady Cressmore was not explicit about, but which was understood by everyone in the party as being the intention of a woman who thought her friend had been a widow long enough, and that the Duke of Renmore had been a bachelor long enough, and that the house party was an occasion for resolving both conditions. Among them was also a man named Sir Gerald Howe, who was 50 and knew the Duke from his school days, and who came to every house party because he found the Duke's company worth the journey and the food worth the 3 weeks. And among them was a man named Lord Carston, who was 45 and had the quality of a man who had been somewhere near the edge of polite society long enough that he knew all its rules and felt no particular obligation to follow them, and who used French and Spanish and Italian in conversation the way some men used a knife at the table, for the pleasure of the precision and with a slight edge to it. Catalina cooked. She cooked on Wednesday evening the first dinner of the house party, which was a dinner she had planned carefully, not ambitious but entirely good, the kind of dinner that said the cook knew what she was doing and was not going to show off, and was going to make everything exactly right. The dinner was very good. Sir Gerald said so, with the authority of a man who had eaten at a great many tables and had opinions that mattered. Lady Cressmore said so, with the enthusiasm of a woman who was also paying attention to whether the Duke was paying attention to Lady Forsyth over the roast, which he was not, or not in the way she had intended. Lord Carstone said nothing about the food specifically, but he ate it with the attention of a man who recognized quality and was not going to compliment the kitchen, because complimenting the kitchen was not something Lord Carstone did. The Duke said to Mrs. Aldworth at the end of the evening when the guests had gone to the drawing room that the dinner was excellent. Mrs. Aldworth said, "The temporary cook." The Duke said, "Yes." Mrs. Aldworth said, "She comes recommended." The Duke said, "She cooks with something specific." He said it without being able to say what the something specific was, which was unusual for him because he was normally precise. Mrs. Aldworth filed this without comment and went to the kitchen. Cato had been at Catalina's kitchen door for 2 hours during the dinner preparation. He was there again Thursday morning. She gave him a piece of the bread she had made for breakfast, and he took it with great dignity, which was how he took everything. She said, in Spanish, "You are a very dignified creature," she said. "Most dogs would have been more enthusiastic about the bread," she said. "You took it as though you were conferring an honor." He sat beside her while she prepared the Thursday kitchen, and she talked to him in Spanish the way she talked to herself when she was cooking, which was a running commentary on what she was doing and why, the professional thinking made audible, and he listened with the quality of a dog for whom listening was a serious activity. She said, "The saffron rice tonight," she said. "The Duke's guests are English, and most of them will not have had properly made saffron rice, which means they will have had either too much saffron or not enough saffron, or both at different times, and neither is the right amount." She said, "The right amount is the amount that makes the rice gold without making the rice taste only of saffron." She said, "The rice should taste of itself, and then of the saffron, and the stalk, and the herbs, in that order." She said, "You do not care about the order." He did not dispute this. She said, "You care about the bread." He moved his ears in confirmation. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that happened when something was genuinely funny, and not the kind that happened when someone thought you should laugh, and the kitchen was empty except for her and the dog, and the laugh was entirely her own. The Duke heard it. He was in the passage outside the kitchen, not standing there deliberately, passing through to the garden, and the laugh came through the kitchen door, and he stopped and heard it, and it was the laugh of a person who was entirely unaware of being heard, and then he walked on to the garden because he had not intended to stop. The house party found its rhythm. The days had the structure that house parties had, the mornings of leisure and the afternoons of organized activity, and the evenings of dinner and cards, and the particular social work of a group of people who were well acquainted with each other and were performing their acquaintance for the benefit of the group. Catalina cooked. She cooked every day, 3 meals and the afternoon tea, and the meals were excellent, each one the combination of the 2 cuisines that no one in the party could quite identify, the flavor of something that was both familiar and new, and the party's appreciation of the food was the particular appreciation of people who were enjoying something without fully understanding what it was. Lord Carstone understood. He understood because he had spent time in Spain and he had a sophisticated palate, and he recognized the saffron and the pimenton and the particular way the stock had been made, and he made a comment on the Thursday evening about the Spanish influence in the kitchen, that was sharp in the way his comments were sharp, the way of a man who showed knowledge in order to show that he had knowledge that others did not. The Duke said, "The cook is Spanish." Lord Carsten said, "Half, one presumes." He said, "The other half is English." He said it with the air of a man saying a polite thing that was not entirely polite, and the table received it and moved on. Catalina did not hear this. She was in the kitchen. Cato was on the kitchen step. She said, in Spanish, "The roast went well tonight." He agreed, in the way of a dog whose agreement manifested as a slight movement of the tail. She said, "Lord Carsten will want something specific tomorrow. I can tell by the way he eats." She said, "He eats like a man who is forming a judgment and wants to find fault." She said, "Men like that are the most useful guests because they keep you precise." She said, "The Duke eats differently." She said, "The Duke eats like a man who is tasting." She said, "Not judging, tasting." She said, "There is a difference." She said, "The judge is looking for something wrong, and the taster is looking for something true." She said, "I prefer to cook for the taster." Cato lay down on the step, and she went on with the washing up. The incident happened on the Saturday evening of the first week. It happened at dinner, at the point in dinner, when the wine had been present for long enough that the conversation had loosened, and the usual cautions were slightly less than usual, and Lord Carsten had been talking about his time in Madrid with the energy of a man enjoying an audience. He had been talking about the Spanish in the way that men who had spent time in a country sometimes talked about it, with the affection that contained within it the superiority of the observer, the person who had been there and returned, who understood the thing from the outside in the way natives never could. He said something in Spanish to the Duke. He said it across the table, in Spanish, about the food, and what he said was a compliment to the food, and also, beneath the compliment, a comment about the cook, which was that the girl in the kitchen made good rice for someone who was only half the thing. He said it in Spanish because he assumed, correctly, that no one else at the table spoke Spanish, and because saying it in English would have required him to be responsible for the saying of it in a way that Spanish in an English dining room did not require. The Duke smiled. It was a smile he would think about later, the smile of a man who received a comment without examining it, the social smile that confirmed the reception without confirming the content, and he said something in Spanish in return, something that was lighter than what Lord Carsten had said, but was in the same key, a comment about the rice being better than one would expect from the circumstances, and he said it in the ease of a man who had not thought very carefully about what he was saying. He had not thought very carefully. He was not paying full attention. He was thinking about the estate correspondence that needed addressing tomorrow, and about Lady Forsyth, who was looking at him again, in the way that Lady Cressmore had arranged, and about the fact that the wine was good, and the evening was going well, and Lord Carsten was entertaining, and it was easy to say the easy thing. He said the easy thing. He said it in Spanish. The dining room door opened. Catalina came in. She came in because the footman who was supposed to bring the next course had turned his ankle on the service stair, and she had brought it herself, which she did not usually do, which was not her place to do, which she would not have done except that the dish was a cold one and could not wait, and there was no one else available at that precise moment. She came in with the dish. She heard the Spanish. She heard all of it. She heard Lord Carsten's comment, and she heard the Duke's response, and she heard the ease of both of them, and the assumption underneath both of them, which was the assumption of a room full of people who were safe from the consequence of what they said, because the person they were saying it about was in the kitchen and did not speak Spanish. She set the dish down. She set it down carefully, because the dish was a cold asparagus with a vinaigrette she had made that morning from the garden herbs, and she set it on the table at exactly the right position, and she straightened up, and she said, In Spanish, the asparagus is from the kitchen garden and the vinaigrette is tarragon and chervil. She said, I hope it is to everyone's satisfaction. She said it in the Spanish of a woman who had grown up in Seville, which was the Spanish of a particular city and a particular class within that city, which was not the Spanish of a kitchen maid, and was not the Spanish of a tourist, and was the Spanish of someone for whom it was a first language and not a performance. She said it to the table. She said it clearly. And then she turned and went back to the kitchen. The dining room was silent. Not the silence of a room that had not heard. The silence of a room that had heard everything and was in the process of understanding what it had heard, and what it had heard was that the cook in the kitchen spoke Spanish, and had heard the comments, and had said nothing about the comments, and had said everything necessary about the asparagus and the vinaigrette, and had left. Lord Carsten had the expression of a man who had been in situations of this kind before, and had developed the capacity to manage them without any visible discomfort. The other guests had various expressions, mostly in the range of suppressed fascination. Lady Forsyth had the expression of a woman who had just seen something she had not expected and found it considerably more interesting than the previous hour of dinner. Sir Gerald had the expression of a man who had seen a great many things at a great many dinner tables and was very carefully not looking at the Duke. The Duke had no expression. He had the face of a man who had just understood something that could not be ununderstood, which was the face of a person whose casual ease had just shown them exactly what it was made of, and what it was made of was the assumption that the person they were speaking about was not present to hear it, and the assumption had been wrong, and the wrongness was in the room with all 12 of them and was not going to go away. He said, "Excuse me." He stood up. He went to the kitchen. The kitchen was warm and bright and smelled of the dinner and the herbs and the bread she had made that morning, and Catalina was at the counter with her back to the door, and Cato was on the step, and when the Duke came through the door, Cato looked at him with the steady look of a dog who was watching something important and had opinions about it. He said, "Miss Voss." She did not turn immediately. She finished what she was doing, which was covering the next dish, and then she turned. She looked at him with the face of a woman who had decided how she was going to conduct herself in this room before she turned around and had conducted herself accordingly, which was with the complete composure of a person who was not going to give anyone their face. He said, "You heard." She said, "Yes." He said, "All of it." She said, "Yes." He said nothing for a moment. She waited. He said, "What I said was thoughtless and unkind, and it was said in the assumption that you were not present, which was itself the problem and not the excuse." She said nothing. He said, "The assumption was that you were safe to speak about because you were in the kitchen." He said, "It was wrong in every way, not only because you were not in the kitchen." She said, "Yes." He said, "I am sorry." She said, "Your Grace." He said, "I am sorry for what was said and for the ease of saying it, which was the worst part." He said it without conditions and without the performance of contrition, just the plain statement. She looked at him. She said, "Lord Carsten is your guest." He said, "Yes." She said, "He will be here 2 more weeks." He said, "Yes." She said, "And I am the temporary cook." He said, "Yes." She said, "Those are facts that do not change because you have apologized." He said, "No." He said, "They do not change." He said, "I am not asking them to change." He said, "I am telling you that what was said was wrong, and I said part of it, and I am sorry for the part I said." She said, "And Lord Carsten's part?" He said, "Lord Carsten will be spoken to." She said, "By you." He said, "Yes." She looked at him. She said, "That is not a small thing." He said, "No." He said, "It is not." He said, "It is the correct thing." She said, "Yes." She said, "Your Grace." He said, "Yes." She said, "The next course is ready." He said, "Yes." He said, "Catalina Voss." She said, "Yes." He said, "How long have you been speaking Spanish to my dog?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Tuesday morning." He said, "In the kitchen garden." She said, "Yes." He said, "Cato does not sit with strangers." She said, "I know." She said, "I was surprised." He said, "He has not sat with a stranger in 7 years." She said, "He came to the time." He said, "Yes." He said, "I know." He said, "I was at the desk." She looked at him. She said, "You saw." He said, "I saw him sit beside you, and I watched you talk to him." She said, "I talk to myself when I cook." She said, "I was not expecting a dog." He said, "No." He said, "He was not expecting you either." He said, "It was mutual, apparently." She said, "Your Grace." He said, "The next course." She said, "Yes." She turned back to the counter. He looked at the dog on the step. Cato looked at him with the steady, unhurried look that said everything the dog needed to say, which was that he had made his assessment, and his assessment was correct, and the Duke was welcome to catch up at his own pace. He went back to the dining room. He spoke to Lord Carsten that night, after the guests had gone to the drawing room, in the library, directly. Lord Carsten received it with the smoothness of a man who was accustomed to navigating social difficulties, and found the navigation easier than most people found it, which was the quality of a man who had been near the edge for long enough that the edge was familiar. He said the appropriate things, and the Duke received the appropriate things with the knowledge that appropriate things were what Lord Carsten did well, and were not the same as honest things, and it was sufficient for the purpose, which was that the comment would not be repeated, and it was not repeated. Sunday came. Catalina cooked the Sunday lunch, and it was the best lunch of the party so far, which Sir Gerald noted with the authority he brought to all his food opinions, and which Lady Forsyth noted with the additional observation that the cook was remarkable, and she had heard there was a story. Lady Cressmore said, "What story?" Lady Forsyth said, "The Spanish." Lady Cressmore said, "What about the Spanish?" Lady Forsyth said, "Someone told me the cook speaks Spanish, and there was an incident at dinner on Saturday." Lady Cressmore looked at the Duke, who was at the other end of the table talking to Sir Gerald, and she thought that she had brought her friend to this house party for a specific purpose, and the specific purpose was not proceeding as planned, and she was not entirely certain why. She was fairly certain it had something to do with the kitchen. The kitchen garden was where Catalina went in the mornings and where Cato went after her, and the kitchen step was where Cato spent the hours she was cooking, and this arrangement had become the ordinary arrangement of the Wrenmore house party by the end of the first week, unremarkable to the kitchen staff and remarked upon by the household staff with the thoroughness that household staffs applied to the habits of dogs. Mrs. Aldworth had filed it as a fact. The Duke had filed it as something else, something he was not yet naming. On Monday morning, he went to the kitchen garden. He did not go for a particular reason. He went because the morning was good and the correspondence could wait, and the kitchen garden was where he found himself going. And when he arrived, Catalina was at the herb bed, and Cato was beside her, and she was talking, in Spanish, and she did not hear him at the garden wall. He did not announce himself immediately. He heard her say, in Spanish, "The Duke came to the kitchen on Saturday." He heard her say, "He apologized correctly." She said, "He said I am sorry for what was said, and for the ease of saying it, which was the worst part." She said, "The ease is always the worst part." She said, "He looked at me the way a person looked at something they had not expected to see." She said, "I was not what he expected." She said, "To the dog, you knew, didn't you?" She said, "You came to the time, and you sat down, and you stayed, and you knew before any of us what kind of morning this was going to be. She said, I do not know what to do with a man who apologizes correctly. She said, I have experience with the other kind. She said, I do not have experience with this kind. She said, the time is very good today. He said, from the wall, in Spanish, the time is good every year. He said, the soil in this bed is particularly good. She went still. He said, still in Spanish, I beg your pardon, he said. I was not intending to listen. He said, I came to the garden, and you were here, and I heard you speaking, and I should have announced myself. She turned. She said, in Spanish, how long? He said, since the apology. She said, you heard what I said about the apology. He said, yes. She said, and the dog. He said, yes. He said, he knew before any of us, which I believe is accurate. She was quiet. He said, still in Spanish, you said you do not know what to do with a man who apologizes correctly. She said, yes. He said, neither do I, to be honest. He said, I have not had much practice at being the person who makes the apology rather than the person who receives it. He said, I am not certain I did it correctly. She said, you said what was wrong and why, without conditions. She said, that is correct. He said, yes. He said, I was thinking about it afterward. He said, I was thinking about what you said in the dining room. She said, I said very little in the dining room. He said, you said the asparagus was from the kitchen garden and the vinaigrette was tarragon and chervil. He said, you said it in the Spanish of a woman from Seville, and you set the dish down precisely, and you said it without looking at me. She said, I was speaking to the table. He said, yes. He said, and the table heard it. He said, and I heard it. He said, the most difficult part was that you said nothing about the comments. He said, you said only what was accurate and relevant, which was the asparagus and the vinaigrette. She said, the comments did not require a response from me. He said, no. She said, they required a response from you. He said, yes. She said, and you gave one. He said, yes. He said, it was delayed. He said, the delay was the smile I gave Lord Carston when he said what he said, which was the ease you described. She said, yes. He said, I have been thinking about that smile since Saturday. She said, it was the smile of a man who was not paying attention. He said, yes. He said, I was not paying attention. He said, I was paying attention to the correspondence in my head and the social management of the evening and all the things a house party required, and I was not paying attention to what was being said. She said, not paying attention is how the ease becomes a habit. He said, yes. He said, my father spoke Spanish. He said, he learned it as a young man in Madrid, and he kept it because he found it useful for certain conversations. He said, I inherited the Spanish and the habit of using it for certain conversations. She said, the habit of the room where it does not reach. He said, yes. She said, yes. She said it simply and without anger, the simple acknowledgement of a fact about a habit. He said, Raphael. She looked at him. He said, my name. He said, not the title. He said, I am telling you because you are speaking to me in Spanish, and the Spanish version of my name is Raphael, and I have not had anyone call me Raphael in 12 years. She said, 12 years. He said, since my father died. He said, he called me Raphael. He said, everyone else calls me Renmore. She said, Raphael. He said, yes. He said, that is correct. She said, I am Catalina. He said, I know. She said, Kata, to people I allow. He said, yes. He said, not yet. She said, no. She said, not yet. They stood on either side of the herb bed in the Monday morning, and the dog was between them, and the time was very good, and the correspondence was in the study, and the house party was in the house, and none of it was the most relevant thing in the garden. He said, "The saffron rice on Thursday." She said, "Yes." He said, "I have eaten saffron rice in Madrid, and in Seville, and in various houses in England, where cooks have attempted it." He said, "Thursday's was the best I have had." She said, "The stock." He said, "Yes." He said, "I noticed." He said, "The stock was made differently from what I have had before." She said, "I toast the bones." She said, "English cooks do not toast the bones." She said, "The toasting adds a depth that the untoasted bone does not have." He said, "Where did you learn to toast the bones?" She said, "My mother." She said, "My mother's kitchen in Seville." She said, "I learned to cook in 2 kitchens simultaneously, which is not efficient but is thorough." He said, "2 kitchens." She said, "My mother's kitchen in Seville, which was Spanish, and my father's kitchen in England, which was English, and the 2 of them did not agree on most things, but they both agreed that stock was the foundation, and that the foundation was worth the time." He said, "Your father." She said, "He died 3 years ago." She said, "I came to England after." He said, "And Seville." She said, "There was nothing left in Seville to stay for." She said, "My mother died when I was 17, and my father came back to England, and I came with him, and then he died, and I stayed." He said, "You stayed." She said, "England is half of me." She said, "I did not know which half until I stayed." He said, "And now?" She said, "Now both halves are here." She said, "The Spanish half and the English half are both here, and the cooking is both of them together, and that is the most useful thing about having 2 halves." He said, "The combination." She said, "Yes." She said, "A person who only knows one cuisine only knows half the questions." She said, "The other half of the questions is in the other cuisine." He said, "Yes." He said, "That is true." He said, "Catalina." She said, "Yes." He said, "I am going to ask you something practical." She said, "Ask it." He said, "The house party is 3 weeks." He said, "The regular cook returns in May." He said, "After May, there is no current arrangement for the summer period, because the summer period had been covered by an arrangement that fell through in March and has not been replaced." She said, "You are asking whether I am available for the summer." He said, "Yes." He said, "I am asking practically." He said, "The estate needs a cook for the summer, and you are the best temporary cook in the county, and I am asking whether you are available." She said, "That is a practical question." He said, "Yes." She said, "And is it only a practical question?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I am asking practically, because the practical question is the one I have the right to ask at this point in a Monday morning conversation in the kitchen garden." She said, "And the other questions?" He said, "The other questions require more Monday mornings than one." She said, "Yes." She said, "The summer?" He said, "Yes." She said, "What does the summer involve?" He said, "The household from May to September." He said, "A family visit in June from my sister and her children." He said, "A second house party in August that is smaller than this one." She said, "How many for the August party?" He said, 6. She said, "And the family in June?" He said, "My sister and 4 children under 10, and her husband who does not eat fish, and my niece who is 7 and will eat nothing that is not beige." She said, "How beige?" He said, "Comprehensively beige." She said, "Bread." He said, "Yes." She said, "Pasta." He said, "Yes." She said, "I can work with beige." She said, "Beige is a starting point." He said, "Yes." He said, "My sister will be very relieved to hear that." She said, "The summer." He said, "Yes." She said, "Yes." He said, "Yes." He said, "Catalina." She said, "Yes." He said, "The dog." She said, "Yes." He said, "He has been on the kitchen step every day." She said, "Yes." He said, "He follows you in the garden." She said, "Yes." He said, "In 7 years he has not done that with anyone." She said, "I know." He said, "How do you know?" She said, "Mrs. Aldworth told me on Wednesday." She said, "The dog doesn't do that." She said, "Mrs. Aldworth told me on Wednesday." She said, "Mrs. Aldworth was not certain whether she was warning me or informing me." He said, "What did you think?" She said, "I thought she was informing me." She said, "Mrs. Aldworth does not warn lightly." He said, "No." He said, "She does not." He said, "What does it mean to you?" "The dog." She said, "It means I was honest with him." She said, "I talk to him the way I talk to myself when I cook, which is the thinking out loud, and he heard all of it, including the things that were not for anyone." She said, "When someone hears the things that are not for anyone and stays, you know something about them." He said, "You know they are trustworthy." She said, "You know they are not performing." She said, "A dog who stays when you say the thing not meant for anyone is not staying for performance." He said, "No." He said, "And a man in the garden wall who hears the thing not meant for anyone," she said, "is either trustworthy or has very bad timing." He said, "Yes." He said, "I am hoping the former." She said, "Yes." She said, "I think the former." He said, "Thank you." She said, "The time needs water." She said, "The dry spell last week." He said, "I will tell the gardener." She said, "I can water it." He said, "Yes." He said, "But the gardener should know about the dry spell in this bed, because it will happen again, and you will not always be here to notice." She said, "I will be here for the summer." He said, "Yes." He said, "But after the summer." She said, "After the summer is after the summer." He said, "Yes." He said, "We will discuss after the summer when the summer arrives." She said, "Yes." He went back to the house with the particular quality of a man who had been in a garden on a Monday morning for longer than he had intended, and was not sorry about it. Cato watched him go, and then looked at Catalina. She said, in Spanish, "Yes, I know." He moved his ears. She said, "It is very early, and I am a temporary cook." He lay down in the herb bed, which he was not supposed to do, and she said, "Out of that large one," and he moved 6 inches to the left, which was technically out of the herbs but was also not very far out of the herbs. She let him stay. The second week of the house party had the quality of a thing that had changed and was settling into the changed form. Lord Carsten was careful in a way he had not been the first week, which was the care of a man who had been spoken to and was managing his behavior accordingly, and the management was smooth, because Lord Carsten was a smooth man, but it was management and not the genuine thing, and the difference was visible to anyone paying attention. Lady Forsyth was paying attention. She had been paying attention since Saturday evening, and she had been forming an opinion since Monday, which was the kind of opinion a perceptive woman formed when she had seen something unexpected and had been watching its development. She said to Lady Cressmore on Tuesday afternoon, "The Duke is spending time in the kitchen garden." Lady Cressmore said, "It is his garden." Lady Forsyth said, "Yes." She said, "And the cook is in the kitchen garden every morning." Lady Cressmore said, "She is gathering herbs." Lady Forsyth said, "Yes." She said, "And the Duke is gathering—" She paused. She said, "Whatever it is one gathers in a kitchen garden at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning." Lady Cressmore said, "He is not interested in the cook." Lady Forsyth said, "I did not say interested." She said, "I said spending time." Lady Cressmore said, "He is the Duke of Renmore." Lady Forsyth said, "Yes." She said, "I know what he is." She said, "I also know what I saw at dinner on Saturday, and what I have seen in the mornings this week, and I am telling you, Eliza, that the thing you brought me here for is not the thing that is happening." Lady Cressmore said, "Nothing is happening." Lady Forsyth said, "Yes." She said, "Nothing is happening yet." She said, "But the dog is on the kitchen step." Lady Cressmore said, "What does that mean?" Lady Forsyth said, "It means the dog knows something we don't." This was accurate. The week continued. Wednesday brought rain, which kept everyone inside and made the afternoon long and the evening cards more pointed than usual. And Lord Carston won at cards because Lord Carston generally won at things that rewarded a certain kind of intelligence and a certain indifference to the people you were winning against. Sir Gerald lost to Lord Carston at cards and said, to the Duke afterward, in the library where the two of them had gone for the brandy, that Sir Gerald said was the only remedy for losing to Carston, that Carston was a man he would not choose to have in his house. The Duke said, "He is here for 3 weeks." Sir Gerald said, "Yes." He said, "I am aware." He said, "The food is excellent." The Duke said, "Yes." Sir Gerald said, "The cook." The Duke said, "Yes." Sir Gerald said, "Saturday evening." The Duke said, "Yes." Sir Gerald said, "It was well handled." The Duke said, "It was handled late." Sir Gerald said, "Yes." He said, "But it was handled." He said, "And the apology to the kitchen." The Duke said, "She heard all of it." Sir Gerald said, "Yes." He said, "I know." He said, "She set the asparagus down without spilling a drop, and said the tarragon and chervil, and left." He said, "That is a person who knows how to conduct herself." The Duke said, "Yes." Sir Gerald said, "Gerald." The Duke looked at him. Sir Gerald said, "I have known you for 30 years. He said, "I am going to say something, and you are going to listen, and not tell me about the title, and the house party, and the appropriate management of the estate summer." The Duke said, "Say it." Sir Gerald said, "Cato has been on the kitchen step every day." The Duke said, "Yes." Sir Gerald said, "In 7 years." The Duke said, "Yes." Sir Gerald said, "The dog knows." The Duke said, "I am aware." Sir Gerald said, "Good." He said, "Drink your brandy." The 3rd week arrived. The 3rd week brought the particular quality that 3rd weeks had, which was the awareness of ending, the last days of a structure that had settled into the ordinary and was about to stop being ordinary. Catalina cooked the last dinners with the attention she had brought to all of them, and the attention had not diminished, which was the mark of a professional who brought the full thing to every occasion and not only the impressive ones. On the Thursday of the 3rd week, the day before the last dinner, she was in the kitchen garden in the morning, and the Duke came over the wall. He came over the wall because the gate was stuck, which was a thing the garden gate did periodically, and he had been on the outside of it and had gone over rather than going around, and he arrived in the garden with less dignity than he had intended, and Catalina was there, and Cato was there, and both of them were watching. She said, in Spanish, "The gate sticks in the wet." He said, "Yes." He said, "I know." She said, "You should have gone around." He said, "It is 40 meters around." She said, "Yes. And now you have a coat that has been over a garden wall." He looked at the coat. She said, "Come here." He came to where she was standing, and she brushed the garden wall from the coat with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a woman removing a problem that was removable, and he stood and let her do it because it was the practical thing, and she was practical. She said, "There." He said, "Thank you." She said, "The gate needs looking at before August." He said, "Yes." He said, "I will have it seen to." She said, if the August party guests go over it, they will be less dignified than you. He said, yes. He said, the August party is 6 people who are more accustomed to gates than the current party. He said, they would manage. She said, yes. She said, but the gate is better fixed. He said, yes. He said, Catalina. She said, yes. He said, the summer. She said, yes. He said, the arrangement is from May to September. She said, yes. He said, and in September. She said, in September the summer ends. He said, yes. He said, and after September. She said, after September is a question I have been thinking about. He said, yes. He said, so have I. She said, I have been thinking about it as a practical question. He said, yes. She said, the practical question is whether there is a position at Renmore after September, and the practical answer is that there is not, because the regular cook returns in May and is here through the following year and the year after that. He said, yes. She said, so the practical question does not have a practical answer. He said, no. He said, the practical question is the wrong question. She looked at him. He said, I have been thinking about the wrong question for 2 weeks. She said, what is the right question? He said, the right question is whether Catalina Voss wants to be at Renmore in October and November and December, which has nothing to do with whether there is a cook's position available. She said, that is a different question. He said, yes. He said, it is the question I should have been asking. She said, Raphael. He said, yes. She said, you are the Duke of Renmore. He said, yes. She said, and I am a temporary cook. He said, you are a cook who speaks Spanish in a kitchen garden and tosses bones before she makes stock, and has had Cato on the kitchen step every day for 3 weeks. She said, those things are true. He said, yes. He said, they are the things that are true about you, which is a different accounting from the accounting of positions and titles. She said, the county has a different accounting. He said, yes. He said, the county's accounting is not the one I use for important things. She said, what accounting do you use for important things? He said, the dogs. She was quiet. He said, in 7 years he has sat with no one. He said, in the first Tuesday morning of the house party, he sat with you in the time, and he has been on the kitchen step every day since. He said, I have been watching him do this for 3 weeks and thinking about why, and the why is the same why as the Spanish in the dining room that did not reach, and the asparagus, and the tarragon, and Cherville, and the Monday morning in the garden, and 2 weeks of the wrong question. He said, the why is that you are honest in a way that a dog knows, and that I have been learning slowly. She said, you have been learning slowly. He said, yes. He said, I came into the garden in April to say the wrong question in a practical way, and I have been arriving at the right question for 3 weeks, and I am here now, with garden wall on my coat, and the right question, and I am asking it. She said, what is the right question? He said, will you stay? She said, at Renmore. He said, yes. He said, at Renmore, and not as the cook, although if you want to cook, I will eat everything you make for the rest of my life. He said, at Renmore, because I have been Raphael to no one for 12 years, and I have been Raphael to you since Monday morning in the garden, and I find I cannot make that stop being true. She said, Raphael. He said, yes. She said, the house party ends tomorrow. He said, yes. She said, and the guests leave. He said, yes. She said, and Lord Carston leaves. He said, yes. He said, Lord Carston is not coming to the August party. She said, I know. She said, Mrs. Aldworth told me. She said, "Mrs. Aldworth tells me things she thinks I should know, and she thought I should know that." He said, "Yes." She said, "Mrs. Aldworth is a very precise woman." He said, "Yes." He said, "She has been running this house for 22 years, and she knows everything that matters, and does not say anything that doesn't." She said, "After the guests leave, the kitchen is very quiet." She said, "She told me that on Tuesday." He said, "She told you the kitchen would be quiet." She said, "Yes." He said, "Catalina." She said, "Yes." He said, "I am asking you to stay in a kitchen that will be quiet after the guests leave." She said, "A quiet kitchen is not a bad thing." He said, "No." He said, "It is the best kind." She said, "And October." He said, "Yes." She said, "And November." He said, "Yes." She said, "And the question of December and after." He said, "Yes." He said, "That is the question I am asking." He said, "December and after." She looked at the kitchen garden, the herb beds and the thyme that had been good this year, and the asparagus that was finished for the season, and the late planting that was coming up in the east bed. She looked at the dog who was sitting between them in the garden in the morning light, with the quality of a dog who had known for 3 weeks what the right question was, and had been waiting for the people to catch up. She said, in Spanish, "Cato." He looked at her. She said, in Spanish, "You knew." He moved his ears. She said, "Yes." She said, "I know you did." She said, to Raphael, in Spanish, "He knew on the first Tuesday morning." He said, in Spanish, "Yes." He said, "He always knows before I do." He said, "That is why I pay attention to him." She said, "A duke who pays attention to his dog." He said, "A duke who pays attention to his dog and is learning to pay attention to other things." She said, "You are getting better at it." He said, "Yes." He said, "I have good examples." She said, "The time." He said, "Yes." She said, "And the asparagus." He said, "And the asparagus." She said, "And the wrong question." He said, "And the wrong question." He said, "And the right one, which I finally arrived at." She said, in English, "Yes." He said, "Yes." She said, "I will stay." She said it simply and completely, in English, the language they shared, the language that was half of her and half of him, and he received it in the same way. And the garden was quiet around them, and the dog was between them, and the time was good, and the gate needed fixing before August. He said, "The gate." She said, "Yes." He said, "I will have it seen to this week." She said, "Have the hinge replaced, not just tightened." She said, "Tightening is temporary." She said, "A new hinge is the actual fix." He said, "A new hinge." She said, "Yes." He said, "You are very thorough." She said, "I am a cook." She said, "A cook who is not thorough produces a dinner that is close to right, and close to right is not the same as right." He said, "No." She said, "The hinge." He said, "I will have a new hinge by Thursday." She said, "Good." He said, "Kata." She looked at him. He said, "Yes." He said, "I meant it as a question." She said, "Yes." He said, "Yes." She said, "Yes." Cato lay down in the herb bed, which he was still not supposed to do, and this time neither of them told him to move. The house party ended on Friday. The guests left in the Friday morning in the way of guests who had been at a house party for 3 weeks, which was with the slightly dazed quality of people re-entering a world that had not been waiting for them, with the carriages and the luggage, and the various expressions of people who had enjoyed themselves in various proportions. Sir Gerald said, to the Duke at the door, "The food was the best I have had in 30 years of house parties." He said, "Tell the cook." He said, "I intend to." He went to the kitchen and he said to Catalina, "That was the finest 3 weeks of eating in my adult life," and he said it with the authority he brought to all his food opinions. And she said thank you, and he said no, truly, and he meant it, and she received it with the directness she received everything. Lord Carsten left without going to the kitchen. Lady Forsyth said, at the door, to the Duke, "I came here for one purpose, and I am leaving with a different impression than I expected." He said, "I hope it is a good impression." She said, "It is a very good impression." She said, "It is the impression of a house that knows what it is." She said, "Not every house does." He said, "No." She said, "Your cook is remarkable." He said, "Yes." She said, "I hope she stays." He said, "She is staying." Lady Forsyth looked at him, and then she looked at Lady Cressmore, who was already at the carriage and had missed this exchange, and she thought that she was going to have a very interesting conversation with Eliza on the way home, and that Eliza was going to be surprised, and that the surprise was going to require some time to settle, and that in the end, Eliza was going to be glad, because a woman who wanted her friend to be happy and had been looking in the wrong direction was still a woman who wanted her friend to be happy and would eventually turn to face the right direction. She said, "Good morning, Your Grace." He said, "Good morning, Lady Forsyth." She went to the carriage. The house was quiet. The particular quiet of a house after a house party, which was a quiet that had rooms in it and the absence of the people who had filled the rooms and the return of the ordinary, and the ordinary was good. The ordinary was the thing the house was when it was itself and not performing. He went to the kitchen. She was cleaning down after the breakfast service and Cato was on the step. He said, "They have gone." She said, "Yes." He said, "The house is quiet." She said, "Yes." She said, "Mrs. Aldworth said it would be." He said, "Yes." He said, "She is usually right." She said, "The new hinge." He said, "Thursday." She said, "Good." She said, "Raphael." He said, "Yes." She said, "The saffron rice." He said, "Yes." She said, "I am going to make it tonight." She said, "For the household." She said, "When there are no guests, is the right time to make the things you want to make, rather than the things the occasion requires." He said, "Yes." He said, "May I eat in the kitchen?" She said, "The Duke of Renmore does not eat in the kitchen." He said, "The Duke of Renmore has never had a kitchen worth eating in." She said, "Yes." She said, "He has one now." He said, "Yes." She said, "Sit down." He sat down. Cato moved from the step to the floor inside the kitchen and lay down beside the chair with the quality of a dog who had been waiting 3 weeks for this precise arrangement and was entirely satisfied with it. She said, in Spanish, "Yes, I know." He moved his ears. She said, "You knew on Tuesday." She went back to the rice. He sat in the kitchen that was his and watched a woman make saffron rice in the Spanish way, toasting the bones for the stock and adding the saffron at the precise moment, and talking to herself in Spanish as she cooked. The professional thinking made audible the two halves of her in every part of the work. He thought about the dining room in April, and the French that did not reach, and the asparagus, and the tarragon, and Cherville, and the Monday morning in the garden, and the wrong question, and the right one. He thought about a dog who knew before any of them. He thought about a woman who talked to herself when she cooked, and had not known there was a dog, and had talked to him anyway. He thought about Cato, who was between his feet now, enormous and gray and entirely satisfied. The dog who had known on the first Tuesday morning what the right question was, and had been on the kitchen step every day since, waiting for the people to arrive at it. They had arrived. The rice was going to be excellent. He could smell it already. He was going to eat it in the kitchen, with the dog between his feet, and the October and November and December ahead of them, and a gate that needed a new hinge by Thursday, and a woman who cooked with both halves of herself and talked to dogs in Spanish in kitchen gardens in April. That was the truth of it. He stated it to himself plainly, the way he was learning to state truths, without the ease that was the worst part, and without the wrong question, and without the room where the words did not reach. Just the truth, plain and whole, the way good stock was made, from the actual thing, and not the shortcut. It was enough. It was the whole thing. The rice was excellent. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what the story made you feel. Do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next one.